So as Keith mentioned, I'm Melissa Landry, Executive Director of Louisiana Lawsuit Abuse Watch. Law is a nonpartisan citizen watchdog group established in 2007, focusing exclusively on civil justice reform issues in Louisiana. We provide a grassroots citizen voice to policymakers through public education, grassroots legislative advocacy, and voter education. We work very closely with the Coalition for Common Sense, LABI, and other reform-oriented groups, but we do not directly engage in lobbying efforts or political campaigns. Our strength really comes from mobilizing our base of more than 6,000 supporters across the state and using their voices to really drive the demand for legal reform. So to that end, I want to briefly discuss some of the challenges facing Louisiana and talk a little bit about how we're working to address them with the Coalition for Common Sense and others, and most importantly, talk about how we can get you all more involved in that effort. As Keith mentioned, we have made significant strides in recent years improving Louisiana's business and economic climate with gains in education reform. Certainly the Louisiana Department of Economic Development has been very aggressive in going out creating economic incentives to bring new projects to Louisiana. Ethics reform was a major priority for Governor Jindal in his first term. Unfortunately, lawsuit reform is not an area where we have made significant strides in quite some time. I'm sure many of you may all recall back in the 1990s under the leadership of Governor Foster with very strong support from LCA, LABI, and others, a pro-business legislature passed a whole slew of reforms. Most notably, we eliminated punitive damages except in very rare instances, and also got rid of joint, several, and liability. But since that time, over the last 20 years, not a whole lot has been done to really improve Louisiana's legal climate, and as a result, things have slowly deteriorated as enterprising trial lawyers have found new ways to really game the system. And so now we find ourselves at the top of numerous national lists, for all the wrong reasons. We're number one in the nation for having the highest jury trial threshold. We're going to talk more about that later. We're number two on the American Tort Reform Association's list of judicial hellholes, essentially a listing of the worst places in the country to be sued. We're ranked number 7 on the National Tort Activity Index, which looks at 3 different measures of tort activity, including a concentration of lawyers, total number of lawsuits, and the largest verdicts in each state. Likewise, we found ourselves at the bottom of all the good lists. We rank 47 out of all 50 states for having and enforcing meaningful venue requirements. It basically means our laws kind of allow for shopping of favorable venues. We're ranked 48 for judicial impartiality, meaning there's significant concern about the ability of defendants to get a fair shake before some of our state's elected judges. And overall, Louisiana courts place 49th out of all 50 states for overall legal fairness. New Orleans has also been specifically noted as one of the worst top 10 local jurisdictions in the country. As further proof of the problem, I also like to point out the Center for Public Integrity. In their 2013 Corruption Risk Report Card, they gave us an F for judicial accountability, and then you can see the numbers there. I mean, we barely got a passing D on one of them. Now, I'm sure most of you know the Center for Public Integrity is not exactly a conservative or a business-oriented group, and yet their findings as it relates to Louisiana's judicial climate are consistent with nearly every other result of survey on this topic. And so there's a pretty broad consensus. And it's not just the national groups that say lawsuit abuse is a problem in our state. Individuals and small businesses who live and work in Louisiana recognize it's a serious problem as well. The Coalition for Common Sense conducted a survey of voters just before the start of this 2014 legislative session. These are some of the top line results. 72% of respondents said they agree there are too many lawyers filing frivolous lawsuits in Louisiana. 69% 69% acknowledge the direct correlation between lawsuit abuse and the depressing impact it can have on jobs and investments in our state. And perhaps most importantly, 76% of voters agree that our state laws need to be strengthened to limit lawsuit abuse. That's certainly what we're working on this legislative session. And Jim is going to give you an update on the specifics of the bills a little bit later today.
The Louisiana legislature was controlled by trial lawyer elements up until the Foster administration in the mid-1990s, as Melissa mentioned. A guy named Mike Foster got elected governor, and he had been in the contracting business, among other businesses, and had been sued a lot. Those suits were frivolous, and he was a bit irritated about that fact. And he said when he was elected to a bunch of us folks in the business community, there's too much suing going on. That was basically what he said. He was a man of a few words. And as Karen will remember from Dow, and a number of other of us will remember, we all kind of got together and we did some pretty good work in the legislature in the mid-90s. Kathleen Blanco really wasn't a big pro-trial lawyer person, but we were all really fatigued on both sides after those adventures in the mid-1990s and as those new revised laws took effect. And when she called for a truce between the trial lawyers and the business community, we all kind of said, well, okay. She said, I'm not going to undo anything that's been done, but I don't want to do anything else. And so we all kind of went on pause. Things continued to deteriorate in terms of our situation in the courts. And as Melissa mentioned, while the general attitude of the business community and of those who do site selections and all of the other economic developers is really a whole lot of great things about Louisiana, and there really are. The legal climate is not one of them, as I think she made the case for that very well. And improving that legal climate is not going to happen overnight. And whatever we do in the legislature over the next several years, and hopefully there will be some good changes there, we still have a problem with the court system. And I guess the one thing, if I could say this as an old guy who's been around for all these years, is that industry and the business community is eventually going to have to wake up and understand that they're going to have to get involved in judicial races and change some of the judiciary out and play in that game that is totally controlled by the plaintiff bar, or we're still going to have problems, no matter what laws we pass and what help we get from governors and all that with the laws. We have to get involved in judicial races. And that's not an easy thing. It's a hard thing and it's costly. But if we don't do it, it's only going to get worse. All right, I'm going to kind of, can I move around a little? A little, okay. Coalition for Common Sense that really was formed as Bobby Jindal was elected, and there was a big term limit change in the legislature. And the thought was, well, you know, it's going to be a more conservative legislature. A lot of business people got elected as opposed to people who came up through various elected official ranks. As you know, Governor Jindal had a list of things he wanted to accomplish. Unfortunately, lawsuit reform wasn't on that list, and so really we ended up with some of the same problems we'd had previously in terms of committee appointments and so forth and so on. But anyway, we had hopes, and all these folks and others got together under the banner of the Coalition for Common Sense to try to start developing some programs to improve the legal climate in the state. Louisiana Chemical Association, Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance, always heavily involved in these issues. This session, we have several priorities that we're trying to push through the process. One is a bill that we actually passed through the House several years ago, and we're trying again, and deals with venue shopping in asbestos and other latent disease cases that could include hearing cases and others. We have a problem in that they did major tort reform in Texas and Mississippi, and now all those Texas plaintiff attorneys are buying up Louisiana firms, and they're trying to try all the cases in New Orleans or Lake Charles or Riverville or some of the parishes over here. And we're just trying to set up a bill that says you got to have a plaintiff from that area, and it has to, the damage had to be done there. It's a very simple bill, and I don't know that we're going to get it through. We're trying. We made it through the House. We're in the Senate committee. We have hopes, and we're working it very hard. Representative Shadowin is sponsoring the bill for us, and so far so good. Another one deals with the outside attorney contracts in the AG's office that Melissa talked about. Representative Bishop from Lafayette has a legislation which is through the House over in Senate committee. Will be heard in the next couple of weeks, which actually would put into statute the Louisiana Supreme Court decision that said the state cannot compensate attorneys on a contingency fee basis without express legislative statutory authority. We passed 60 to 43 out of the House, and we'll see how we go in the Senate committee. One we didn't do so well with, consumer lending. This is a national priority, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. These are these out-of-state companies who advertise and basically try to get plaintiffs in lawsuits to join with them. They loan them money, and then the repayment is sometime up to 100 to 150% interest. So basically they get nothing from their lawsuit settlements. Trial lawyers don't like these companies either. We're having absolutely no luck with this one. It's dead for this session. And in fact, the lawsuit lending companies are trying to pass a fake statutory bill to kind of put them under some sort of a regulation, which we have added an amendment to, which would once again only allow them to charge up to 36% as far as interest. So that battle goes on. Jury trial threshold, we spent a lot of time in the first part of the session trying to pass this. Louisiana Association of Business and Industry took the lead, did a wonderful job. We ran into not only trial lawyers, but judges, clerks of courts, sheriffs, DAs, and we lost. We'll be back. Louisiana has a 50,000 jury trial threshold, the only state in the entire nation with anything approaching 50,000. In fact, most don't even have a jury trial threshold. If you want a jury, you can usually get one in other states. So anyway, we'll be back fighting that again another year. These are some of the other bills that dealt with jury trial threshold. There are a couple that make minor changes in that whole situation that are still working through the process, and we have some hopes for, but they're not major reform, they're just baby steps. And then, of course, there are a number of bills that were filed on that subject that are not moving. In addition to the CCS legislation on the Attorney General and the transparency that Representative Bishop has going with us, he also has HB 874, which calls for an annual report regarding litigation initiated by a state agency and requires the Attorney General to publish an annual report of all civil actions initiated by the state. And this is now moving through the process. It looks like it's going to pass, as does HB 149. The AG's office actually signed off that they're okay with that one. Clater has another bill which really doesn't do a whole lot, which may or may not make it. Levy Board lawsuit. As Melissa mentioned, the New Orleans Area Levy Authority has, through a private plaintiff law firm, filed a lawsuit against 97 oil, gas, and natural gas pipeline companies in that area over wetlands damage. And there are several bills going through the process and some that have died, but at the end of the day, we're probably going to pass legislation which the governor supports, which will undo this particular lawsuit. Now that will be appealed in court, I'm sure, all the way to the Supreme Court, but nonetheless, we think we're probably going to put an end to that particular lawsuit. That's maybe all we end up doing this session on all of these lawsuits that have been filed recently, but this one looks like it'll make it through the process. Legacy lawsuits, there was a legacy lawsuit compromise to try to go back again and start addressing the fact that so far we really haven't, the Supreme Court and the earlier legislation passed to try to resolve some of the problems and get these areas cleaned up if there are legitimate problems, has sort of been gone around by the trial lawyers, and then the Supreme Court's on a procedural matter kind of undid the legislation passed a couple of years ago. And so we're going to have to go back and try to put something together that the landowners agree with, that the oil and gas industry agrees with, and we do have a bill, several bills to do that, and those are in the process of trying to work through the system. Some are going to make it, some aren't. I think probably a little progress will be made on this area. There's some other bills we're trying to kill, and for the most part, we're doing okay on that. And there's some other legislation out there that would make, again, baby steps in terms of some tort reform that we have some hopes for. So looking forward, it ain't going to be over after this session. We're not going to make gigantic progress. This issue, I do believe, because it is on everybody's radar, because of all that's gone on the last couple of years, will be major election fodder coming up with the statewide elections in 2015 in the governor's race and in legislative races. We also have a number of judicial races that are coming up that I hope the business community will get involved in. And I hope that you will feel that this is important, that we change the legal climate in Louisiana. It's not an easy thing, it's not a short-term thing, but without everybody getting involved, it's not going to happen. So we'd appreciate your help. Thank you.